My name is Claire Morgan. I am 32 years old, and for 8 years, I paid my parents $2,400 every single month to live in the basement of their house. I did not question it, because I was told that money was going toward the mortgage, because I was told this was temporary, because I was told this was what responsible adults do, because they were my parents. That came out to 192 payments, a total of $230,000, for a debt that did not exist. I did not discover this in a dramatic way. There was no confrontation, no argument, no raised voices. I discovered it because of a neighbor on a quiet Tuesday afternoon at exactly 4:47 p.m. I remember the time because that was the moment my understanding of my family began to fall apart. I was taking out the trash when Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, who lived next door, waved me over. She had lived on that street longer than my parents, longer than me. She asked how long I'd been helping my parents with the house. I told her 8 years. She paused. Then she said something that made absolutely no sense. That house was paid off years ago. I laughed. I told her she must be mistaken. My parents still had a mortgage. She shook her head slowly. No, dear. They paid it off in 2014. Your father celebrated at the neighborhood barbecue. He talked about it all evening. My stomach tightened. I asked her if she was sure. She was. She even remembered the month, April, 2014. That was 1 year before I moved back home. That was 1 year before I started paying them rent. I walked back inside and sat on the edge of my bed, the same basement bedroom I had been paying for since I was 24. I opened my banking app. I scrolled, one transfer after another. $2,400 every month. No gaps. The memo line always said the same thing, rent. I did the math, even though I already knew the answer. $2,400 times 96 months. $230,400. My hands were shaking. Not from anger, from disbelief. I had grown up believing my family was strict but fair. My father believed in discipline. My mother believed in sacrifice. Money was treated seriously. Debt was treated like danger. And family obligations were never optional. So when I graduated college and could not immediately afford my own place, they offered me the basement. They said it would help everyone. They said the money would keep the house afloat. They said I was doing the right thing. They said this was what family does for each other. I believed them. My father typed up a simple agreement. Nothing official, just something clear. $2,400 a month. Automatic transfer, no excuses. At the time, I was earning $48,000 a year. Half of my income went straight to them. I cut costs everywhere else. No vacations, no new clothes, no savings. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was being a good daughter. And now I was sitting there realizing something terrifying. I had never seen a mortgage statement, not once. I had never seen a balance. I had never seen proof. I had just trusted them because they were my parents. That night, I looked up the county property records. It took less than 5 minutes. The result was unmistakable. Mortgage satisfied. Recorded April 12, 2014. Public record. Clear. Undeniable. My name was not on the house, but my money had been flowing somewhere for 8 years. Just not where I was told. I did not confront them that night, not because I was afraid, because I needed to be absolutely certain. Once you accuse your own parents of something like this, you cannot take it back. I printed out my bank statements, every transfer, every month. I highlighted them, stacked them neatly, year by year. While I was doing that, my father knocked on my door. He asked if I was coming upstairs for dinner. I looked at him, the man who taught me budgeting, the man who said honesty mattered. And I wondered how long he had known. I wondered if he ever hesitated, or if this had always been the plan. At dinner, everything felt normal. My mother talked about work. My older sister, Natalie Morgan, was mentioned, and she always was. The successful one. The one who moved out early. The one who never needed help. I listened quietly. And something became very clear to me in that moment. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not confusion. This was a system. A quiet one. A polite one. But a system that worked perfectly. As long as I did not question it. And I had never questioned it. Until now. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If you discovered the people you trusted most had been taking your money for years under false pretenses, what would you do? Comment the number 1 if you believe family does not get a free pass to exploit you. This is only the beginning. In the next part, I will explain what my family dynamic was really like and why I was the easiest one for them to take from. Stay with me. Once the idea settled in my mind that the money might never have been for a mortgage, I started looking at my family differently. Not emotionally, structurally, because systems do not begin with theft, they begin with rules. My family was middle class by income, but upper class in behavior. Image mattered, order mattered, and above all, appearance mattered more than comfort. From the outside, we looked stable. A clean house, polite conversations, holiday cards sent on time. Inside, there was a clear hierarchy, and everyone knew their role. My father believed in control. He spoke in statements, not questions. You do this, you do not do that. This is how things are done. He believed authority was something you earned once and then never had to justify again. He ran the house like a system, efficient, predictable, unchallenged. My mother managed emotions, quietly, carefully. She never raised her voice. She never gave direct orders. Instead, she used disappointment. Sacrifice. Guilt. She would say things like, after everything we have done for you, or we only want what is best, or this hurts us more than it hurts you. And somehow those words always landed on me, not on my sister. My older sister Natalie was the center of gravity in our family. Everything bent toward her. She was successful early, confident, naturally aligned with my parents' expectations. She moved out at 22, got a good job, never came back. She was praised constantly. Even when she was not in the room. Natalie would never do that. Natalie understands responsibility. Natalie has always been independent. I learned early that comparison was not a contest I could win. So I adapted. I became agreeable, flexible, low maintenance. I learned to anticipate needs, to smooth over tension, to make myself useful. When I did well, it was expected. When I struggled, it was inconvenient. No one said this out loud. They did not have to. The structure made it clear. When I moved back home after college, it felt like stepping back into a role I had never really left. The basement was separate. That mattered. It kept boundaries clean, out of sight, out of mind. I was close enough to contribute, far enough to be ignored. My father framed the rent as responsibility. My mother framed it as contribution. Natalie framed it as my choice. And I framed it as temporary. That is how the system worked. Everyone benefited. Except me. When money came up, it was never discussed. It was declared. This is what you owe. This is what needs to be done. This is how we keep things fair. And fairness in my family always meant equal pressure, not equal power. I was told often that I was lucky. Lucky to have a place to stay. Lucky to have parents who taught discipline. Lucky to have structure. Gratitude was expected. Questions were not. So I did not ask why the rent never changed. I did not ask why there were no statements. I did not ask why Natalie never contributed. I assumed there was logic I simply did not see. That was my role, to assume. Looking back, I can see how perfectly designed it all was. My father set the rule. My mother reinforced it emotionally. Natalie validated it by being absent, and I absorbed it. Because I had always been the adaptable one, the one who made things work. That is why I was the easiest to take from. Not because I was weak, but because I had been trained to comply. When I started questioning the mortgage, it was not just about money. It was about the entire structure I had grown up inside. Every memory began to reorganize itself. Moments where I was told not to rock the boat. Times I was reminded how much my parents had sacrificed. Conversations where my needs were acknowledged but never prioritized. I realized something uncomfortable. This was not a single bad decision. It was a pattern, a long one, and I had been inside it my entire life. That realization did not make me angry. It made me cautious, because systems like this do not collapse easily. They rely on silence, on habit, on roles being accepted without question. And the moment one person steps out of their assigned place, the system reacts. I had not confronted anyone yet, but something had already changed. I could feel it, the way my father spoke to me, the way my mother watched my reactions, the way Natalie was mentioned more frequently, as if reminding me of the standard. They did not know I had seen the records, but they sensed something, and that told me this was not just about money. It was about control. The basement was not just a room, it was a position, a reminder of where I stood. And once I saw that clearly, I knew I could not unsee it. The question was no longer whether the mortgage was real. The question was how far this system went, and who else knew about it. In the next part, I will explain how I started verifying what I suspected, and why bringing in outside eyes changed everything. Because once a system built on silence is observed, it begins to fail. Once I understood the structure of my family, the money finally made sense. Not morally, mechanically. Because what happened was not impulsive. It was procedural. It began the week I started my first full-time job after college. I came home excited, nervous, relieved to have a paycheck. My father asked to talk. He did not ask how I felt about work. He did not ask if I was settling in. He handed me a printed document. He called it a rental agreement. It was 2 pages. Typed, clear, $2,400 a month. Due on the 1st. Automatic transfer required. The memo line would say rent. He said it was important to keep things clean, professional. He said adults pay their way. He said this would help cover the mortgage. He said this was temporary. I read it. I noticed what it did not include. No mention of utilities, no breakdown of costs, no end date. But I did not question it, because questioning money in my family was seen as disrespect. I signed nothing. He did not ask me to. He did not need to. He set up the transfer himself. All I had to do was approve it, and I did. The first payment went through on time, then the second, then the third. Each time my father would nod when he saw it post, not in gratitude, in confirmation, as if a system was functioning correctly. The money left my account automatically, no reminders, no conversations, just a quiet withdrawal every month. $2,400. Rent. I believed that word. Because I believed the story behind it, that the house was still being paid off, that I was contributing, that this was fair. I did not see a bill, I did not see a statement, I did not see a balance. I saw a roll and I filled it. As the months turned into years, nothing changed. The amount stayed the same. My income increased slightly. The payment did not. I never received a thank you. I never received an update. I never received a timeline. It was simply expected. If I asked about money in general, my mother would say things like, the house is expensive, or we are just trying to stay afloat. If I mentioned moving out, my father would say the market is unstable, or you are not ready yet, or this arrangement is best for everyone. And because I had internalized my place in the system, I accepted those answers. I did not connect the dots, not because the dots were hidden, but because I was taught not to look at them too closely. What I did not know then was that the mortgage had already been paid off. Completely. 1 year before I moved back home. That meant every single payment I made went somewhere else. Not to a lender, not to a bank, not to debt, to my parents. Clean, consistent, unquestioned. The automatic transfer was the key. It removed discussion. It removed emotion. It removed the chance for hesitation. It normalized the extraction. Month after month, year after year. And the memo line did something subtle. It created a record, one that framed the money as rent, not a gift, not support, not shared expense, rent. That distinction mattered because it made everything look legitimate. It made the system defensible. If anyone ever asked, if anyone ever looked, at least that was the assumption. I was not supposed to look. That was the flaw. When I finally laid the bank statements next to the property record, the story collapsed. The money was real. The debt was not. And that meant someone had lied. Not once, but repeatedly. Over 8 years. I thought about the conversations we had about sacrifice, about responsibility, about family pulling together. I thought about the nights I skipped social events because I could not afford them. The opportunities I passed up because I needed stability. The savings I never built because half my income was gone before I saw it. And I realized something painful. This arrangement had not helped everyone. It had helped them quietly, efficiently, without resistance. I had been positioned perfectly, close enough to pay, far enough not to question. I did not confront them yet. Not because I was afraid, because I wanted to understand how deep this went. Was it ignorance or intention? Was it carelessness or design? And there was one detail that would answer that question. Taxes. Because if this money was truly rent, it would be reported. If it was mortgage help, there would be records. If it was neither, then it was something else entirely. That was when I realized I could not investigate this alone. Family systems close ranks quickly. They dismiss, they deflect, They rewrite. I needed someone who dealt in facts, not feelings. That decision changed everything. Before I tell you what I did next, I want to ask you something. If you trusted your family and later discovered the system was designed to benefit them at your expense, would you confront them or investigate quietly? Comment the number 1 if you believe understanding the full truth matters before any confrontation. In the next part, I will explain how I started verifying the money trail and why bringing in an outside professional turned suspicion into certainty. Stay with me. Once the possibility of deception entered my mind, I could not ignore it. Suspicion is loud at first. Then it becomes methodical. I did not want to believe my parents had done this intentionally, so I started with the simplest step. I looked for proof that the mortgage still existed. Late that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I opened my laptop. I searched the county property records. Public information, accessible to anyone. I typed in my parents' address. The page loaded in seconds. Ownership history, lien history, transaction dates, and there it was. Mortgage satisfied. Recorded April 12, 2014. I refreshed the page. I checked again. Same result. No active loans, no outstanding balances, no ambiguity. The house had been fully paid off 1 year before I ever moved into the basement. I sat there staring at the screen, waiting for something to explain it away. A second loan, a refinance, anything. There was nothing. That was the moment suspicion turned into certainty. But certainty without context can still be misleading. So I kept going. I printed the record. I highlighted the date. I cross-referenced it with my first payment. The timeline aligned perfectly. Every payment I made had gone somewhere, just not where I was told. I did not confront my parents. Not yet. Because once you say something like this out loud, the story changes forever. I needed to understand the full scope before I spoke a word. The next morning, I called someone I trusted, a college friend who worked in corporate compliance. Not because I wanted legal advice, but because I wanted to know how to think. I explained the situation calmly. I gave her the dates, the amounts, the arrangement. There was a pause on the line. Then she said something that shifted everything. You need to treat this like an investigation, not a family conversation. She told me not to accuse, not to hint, not to ask questions yet. She told me to document everything. Because if this was intentional, people would protect themselves first. That advice mattered. It slowed me down. It made me careful. I asked her who I should talk to next. She gave me one answer. A forensic accountant, not a regular accountant, not a tax preparer, someone who traces money and intent, someone who works with facts, not narratives. It took me 3 days to make the call. Not because it was difficult, because making that call meant accepting that something was deeply wrong. When I finally did, the accountant listened quietly. He asked for specifics. How long? How much? How it was described. He did not react emotionally. He asked procedural questions. Do you have bank statements? Do you have the agreement? Do you have proof of the mortgage status? I told him yes. He said that was enough to begin. We met a week later in his office. Neutral, professional, nothing about it felt dramatic. That made it worse. I handed him the documents, my statements, the property record, the agreement my father had typed. He looked at them carefully, line by line. He did not rush. He did not comment. Then he asked the question I was not prepared for. Who files your parents' taxes? I hesitated. Then I said my sister's name, Natalie. She was a certified accountant. She had always handled their finances. The forensic accountant looked up. That changes things, he said, because if this money was labeled as rent, it should have been reported as rental income. If it was not reported, that is an issue. If it was reported incorrectly, that is also an issue. Either way, there is exposure. He explained the difference between ignorance and intent, between oversight and design, 8 years of consistent transfers, a memo line, a paid-off property, a licensed professional handling the books. That combination was not accidental. Hearing that felt like something locking into place. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not sloppy bookkeeping. This was a system. The forensic accountant told me he would trace the funds, where they went, how they were categorized, whether taxes reflected them. He warned me that once this process started, the outcome would not be contained. Not emotionally, not legally. I told him to proceed. I did not feel brave. I felt committed. Over the next few weeks, I lived 2 lives, the visible one. Family dinners, casual conversations, routine. And the hidden one, emails, documents, phone calls. Every time my parents talked about finances, I listened differently. Every time my sister was mentioned, I paid attention. Nothing changed on the surface. That told me everything. People who are unaware behave differently from people who assume silence. When the forensic accountant called me back, his tone was measured. He said the money trail was clear. My payments went directly into my parents' account. They were not applied to any loan. They were not recorded as rental income. They were not reported consistently. The memo line created a record, but the tax filings told a different story. There were discrepancies, significant ones. This was no longer just about me. This was about compliance, professional ethics, legal risk. I asked him what I should do. He told me that decision was mine. He told me the facts, what they meant, what they could lead to. He told me something else too. Once you know this, you cannot unknow it, and you cannot control how others respond when the truth becomes visible. I thanked him, I hung up, and I sat in silence for a long time, because at that moment I understood the weight of what I was holding. Not revenge, not leverage, truth. And truth changes things simply by existing. In the next part, I will explain how this investigation led to something no one in my family expected, and why timing became everything. Because systems built on silence do not collapse quietly, they collapse when seen. Once the forensic accountant finished tracing the money, the story changed shape. Up until that point, this had still felt like a private betrayal. Something painful but contained, something that belonged inside a family. That illusion did not survive the next phone call. The accountant did not use dramatic language. He did not raise his voice. He simply stated facts. The payments you made were not reported as rental income, not consistently, not accurately. In some years, not at all. I asked him to explain what that meant. He said that if money is labeled as rent, it creates an obligation. It must be reported. It must be taxed. It must align with records. What your parents did does not align. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. Whoever prepared their taxes would have seen this immediately. I did not answer right away. I already knew. But hearing it out loud made it real. My sister Natalie had been handling their taxes for years. She was a certified public accountant, licensed, trained, bound by professional standards. She did not just understand the rules, she was required to enforce them. That was the moment the situation crossed a line. This was no longer about my parents taking advantage of me. This was about a professional obligation being violated. And that carried consequences far beyond our kitchen table. The accountant explained it calmly. If the income was intentionally hidden, that is tax fraud. If it was misclassified, that is misrepresentation. If it was ignored, that is negligence. And when a licensed professional is involved, it is no longer personal. It is regulatory. I asked him if there was any scenario where this could be an honest mistake. He paused. 8 years of identical transfers, a consistent memo line, a paid-off property, a trained accountant filing the returns. No, he said, that does not happen by accident. I hung up and sat very still, because something inside me understood what this meant before I was ready to accept it. Natalie knew, not just vaguely, not partially. She knew exactly what the money was. She knew where it came from. She knew how it was labeled. And she chose to file the paperwork anyway, for years. That knowledge hurt more than the money. I had spent my life believing that Natalie was simply different, more capable, more independent, better suited to succeed. I never believed she would actively participate in something that harmed me. But participation does not always look like action. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like filing a return and not asking questions. I replayed every conversation in my head. Every time money came up. Every time Natalie spoke confidently about finances. Every time she reassured my parents that everything was handled. Handled for who? The realization was isolating, because now I knew that confronting my parents would not be simple, and confronting my sister would not be safe. This was not a disagreement. This was a potential legal issue, one that involved licensed work, one that could not be undone. The forensic accountant asked me what I wanted to do next. He made it clear that he could document everything. He could prepare a report. He could outline discrepancies, but he could not decide for me. That decision had to come from me. I took a few days to think. During that time, nothing changed at home. My parents went about their routines. Natalie was mentioned casually, as if nothing was wrong, as if I did not know what I now knew. That was the hardest part, living inside the lie after seeing its structure. Every dinner felt staged, every normal conversation felt fragile. I realized something important. They were not worried, they were confident. Confidence like that only comes from believing you are protected. By family, by silence, by position. And that meant if I confronted them privately, the system would close ranks. They would deny, minimize, reframe, and nothing would change. I asked the forensic accountant what typically happens in cases like this. He said that once documentation exists, outcomes depend on exposure. Private exposure leads to private settlements. Public exposure leads to regulatory review. And when professionals are involved, regulatory review does not stay quiet. That was when I understood the real escalation. This was no longer just about recovering money. It was about accountability, not emotional accountability, structural accountability. Natalie had built her career on trust, on accuracy, on ethics, and she had signed off on paperwork that hid my payments, whether to protect my parents or to protect herself. The result was the same. I was not dealing with a family misunderstanding. I was dealing with a compliance issue, a professional one, and professionals are held to standards for a reason. That realization did not make me feel powerful. It made me feel heavy, because I knew that whatever happened next would affect more than just us. Careers, reputations, licenses, lives built on assumptions. I asked myself a hard question. If this were not my family, what would I do? If this were a client, or a company, or a stranger? The answer was immediate. I would follow the facts. That clarity mattered, because it separated guilt from responsibility. I did not create the situation. I did not file those returns. I did not label the transfers. I did not pay myself rent. All I did was trust. The escalation did not come from my investigation. It came from their choices, over 8 years, repeatedly, deliberately. When I finally spoke to the forensic accountant again, I told him to prepare the full report. I told him I wanted everything documented, chronologically, clearly, without interpretation, just facts. Once the forensic accountant began preparing the full report, time started moving differently. Not faster, more deliberately. Every decision now felt weighted, because I understood something clearly for the first time. Truth does not need urgency. It needs positioning. While the report was being assembled, my family continued their lives as if nothing had changed. And that was when the opportunity presented itself. Natalie was getting engaged. The announcement came casually, at dinner. My mother mentioned it with pride, as if it were a collective achievement, a formal engagement party, a large one, held at a private venue. Guest list already forming. This was not a simple celebration. It was a display. Natalie's fiancé came from what my parents like to call a respectable family. Old money, the kind of people whose names were known without explanation. Lawyers, investors, board members, people who valued reputation as currency. My parents were thrilled. They spoke about the event constantly, who would attend, what it would mean, how important it was that everything looked right. And that was when my mother made the request. She asked if I would attend, not casually, carefully. She said it would mean a lot to Natalie. She said it would show unity. She said people would ask questions if I was not there. That last part mattered. Questions. They did not want questions. They wanted an image, a complete family, smiling, supportive, aligned. I listened without responding right away, because I understood what they were asking. They were not asking me to celebrate. They were asking me to perform. They wanted me visible, presentable, quiet. They wanted proof that everything was fine, that nothing was wrong, that the system still worked, and the timing was not accidental. The forensic report was almost finished. The money trail was clear. The facts were documented. All that remained was context, where truth would matter most, where silence would be impossible. I said yes, not immediately, but deliberately. I told my mother I would attend further. I did not negotiate conditions. I did not ask questions. That alone surprised her. I could see it. She had expected hesitation, reluctance. But compliance was familiar, and familiarity made them comfortable. From that moment on, the invitations were sent, the venue was booked, details were shared. Everything was designed to impress. Natalie was radiant, confident, secure. She spoke about her future as if it were inevitable. And perhaps it was, until it was not. I did not change my behavior. I did not act distant. I did not withdraw. I showed up for dinners. I listened. I observed, because observation is part of preparation. The forensic accountant finalized the report 2 weeks before the event. He walked me through it carefully: dates, amounts, account numbers, tax years, discrepancies. Everything was clear. Everything was factual. Nothing was exaggerated. This was not a narrative. It was a record. I asked him what typically happens next. He said outcomes depend on exposure. Private exposure leads to private resolution. Public exposure invites scrutiny, especially when licensed professionals are involved. I thanked him. I told him I would handle the rest. In the days leading up to the engagement party, my parents became attentive. My mother asked what I planned to wear. My father asked if I needed directions. Natalie asked if I was excited. Their concern was performative. They needed reassurance that I would play my role, that I would not disrupt the image they had built. I gave them nothing to worry about. I smiled. I answered politely. I remained vague, because preparation does not announce itself. The venue was impressive, elegant, designed for events where nothing unexpected is supposed to happen. Tables arranged perfectly, lighting softened, music chosen to feel expensive but unobtrusive. Guests arrived dressed for celebration. This was the environment my parents trusted, because people like this do not expect disruption. They expect decorum. That expectation creates vulnerability. I arrived on time. I dressed simply, not to stand out, not to blend in, just present. My parents greeted me with relief. Natalie hugged me. She whispered that she was glad I came. I believed her, in that moment. But gladness is not the same as honesty. As the evening progressed, I watched how my family interacted with others. The stories they told, the version of our lives they presented. Everything was smooth, polished, incomplete. I did not interrupt. I did not correct. I waited. Because I was not there to argue, I was there to reveal. At some point, speeches were announced. The microphone was set up, guests gathered closer, attention shifted toward the stage. Natalie was glowing. My parents were beaming. This was the moment they cared about most: visibility, validation. And that was exactly why it mattered. I knew then that whatever happened next would not be contained, not because I wanted spectacle, but because truth has weight, and weight changes rooms. I stood near the edge of the crowd. The forensic report was not in my hands. It did not need to be. What mattered was that it existed, that it was ready. That facts do not disappear simply because people wish them to. My parents glanced at me more than once, checking, measuring. I met their eyes calmly. They smiled back, still unaware, still confident. The system was about to be tested, not with anger, not with accusation, with reality. And reality does not require permission. In the next part, I will tell you what happened when the spotlight finally turned, and how a celebration became a reckoning. Because once a lie is placed under public light, it does not survive unchanged. Once the spotlight turns, everything slows down. Not because time changes, because your mind starts recording details like evidence. The music lowered. The host tapped the microphone. People shifted their chairs, turning toward the small stage near the front of the room. More than 100 guests were there, packed into a space designed for celebration and approval. There was also a live stream, a small camera on a tripod angled toward the stage. Nothing dramatic, just enough to capture the speeches for relatives who could not attend. The kind of live stream people forget is running, until it matters. Natalie stood beside her fiancé, smiling at the crowd like a person who had never doubted she belonged in rooms like this. My parents were in the front row, proud and composed, as if their family story was complete and unchallenged. I stood near the edge of the crowd, calm on the outside, focused on the inside. Then the host began calling names: friends, colleagues, a few relatives, short speeches, compliments, laughter. And then the host said my name, Claire Morgan. For a second, I almost did not move, not because I was afraid, because I understood what this meant. They were inviting me onto the stage to prove something, that we were united, that we were normal, that whatever people thought they might have heard over the years was wrong. My mother looked back at me and gave a small, encouraging smile. My father nodded once, as if approving the next step. Natalie glanced at me with expectation. There it was, the role. Be gracious, be quiet, be useful. I stepped forward. The crowd parted slightly as I walked to the stage. I could feel the attention building, not suspicion, curiosity. People loved the story of a supportive younger sister. I took the microphone. It was warm from the last speaker. My hands were steady. I did not clear my throat. I did not laugh. I did not start with a joke. I started with my name. My name is Claire Morgan. I paused, just long enough for the room to settle. Then I said something simple. I have lived in my parents' basement for 8 years. A few people chuckled politely, expecting a light story about adulthood and rising rents. I continued. During those 8 years, I paid my parents $2,400 every month. The room stayed light. Some people nodded, like that sounded reasonable in this market. Then I said the next sentence. I was told that money was going toward their mortgage. Silence began to gather. Not full silence yet, the kind where people start listening more carefully. I looked toward my parents. My father was still smiling, but it was tighter now. My mother stopped nodding. I looked back at the room, and I said the part that turned the air cold. The mortgage was paid off in April 2014. It was a public record. The audience did not react loudly. They reacted physically. A shift. A collective stillness. Someone in the back stopped moving their glass. I continued, keeping my voice level. I started paying $2,400 a month in May 2015, 1 year after the mortgage was satisfied. That means I paid 96 months of rent for a debt that did not exist. I let that sit. Then I gave them the number. $2,400 times 96 months is $230,400. The room did not breathe, and in that silence, I could hear the faint sound of the live stream camera adjusting focus. Still recording, still capturing. I did not accuse. I did not call anyone a thief. I did not use emotional language. I stated facts, dates, amounts, timeline, because facts are harder to argue with than feelings. My father shifted in his seat. He looked like he wanted to stand, then thought better of it. My mother stared straight ahead, the smile gone, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Natalie did not move. Her face was frozen, like she was waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. I continued. I found this information through the county property records. Mortgage satisfied April 12, 2014, and I have 8 years of bank statements showing automatic transfers labeled rent. Every month. No gaps, no changes. I paused again, not for drama, for clarity. Then I said the part that made it impossible to pretend this was a misunderstanding. A forensic accountant reviewed the payments and the filings. These payments were not applied to any loan, and they were not reported consistently as rental income. That last sentence landed differently because of the people in that room. Natalie fiancé family, the lawyers, the business owners, the people who understand what compliance means, the people who hear certain words and immediately think of consequences. Forensic accountant, filings, not reported consistently. Those words turn a family secret into a professional problem. I looked at Natalie then, and I said her name. Natalie has handled our parents' taxes. She is a licensed professional. I did not need to say more. The implication was clear. This was not just about my parents' choices. This was about who knew and who signed off. Natalie's eyes widened slightly, not with innocence, with calculation. My father finally stood. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because what do you say in a room full of witnesses when the timeline is this clean? You cannot deny a public record. You cannot deny bank transfers. You cannot shout your way out of arithmetic. A man near the front leaned toward someone beside him and whispered something. I could not hear it, but I saw the reaction. A slow nod, a tightened jaw. That was the moment I knew the room had accepted the facts. Not emotionally, logically. I finished with one final sentence. I did not come here to ruin an engagement. I came here because truth does not disappear just because it is inconvenient. Then I set the microphone back in its stand. I did not wait for applause. I did not wait for outrage. I stepped off the stage and walked toward the exit. No one stopped me. No one followed immediately. Because the room was still processing the collapse of a story they had been invited to believe. Outside, the air felt colder, cleaner, like a storm had just passed. My phone buzzed once, then again. Messages were already coming in. The live stream clip had already begun moving. Because once truth is spoken into a microphone, it does not stay inside a room. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to ask you something. If you had proof and the only way to stop the lie was to speak publicly, Would you do it? Comment the number 1 if you believe facts should not be hidden to protect someone's reputation. In the next part, I will tell you what happened after I left that venue. Who called first? Who tried to control the damage? And why the consequences reached further than anyone expected. I did not see what happened inside the room after I left. I did not need to. The silence told me everything. It was not the awkward kind, not the polite kind. It was the kind that happens when people realize they have been standing on something unstable. Inside the venue, conversations stopped mid-sentence. Glasses were set down untouched. Guests looked at one another, searching for cues that never came. The engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. Instead, it became a moment of collective recalculation. No one applauded. No one laughed it off. Because the numbers were too clean, the timeline too precise, and arithmetic does not argue back. The first call came 10 minutes after I reached my car. It was my mother. I did not answer. The second call was from my father. Then Natalie. Then messages. Long ones, short ones, some pleading, some defensive, some asking me to explain myself. I did not respond. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because explanations only help people rebuild the same story in a different order. I was done participating. While I drove home, the live stream clip began circulating. Someone had recorded the screen. Another person reposted it. Then another. By the time I parked, the video had left the room entirely. It was online, and once it was online, it stopped being a family issue. People who had been at the party started reaching out to one another, quietly at first, then with urgency. Because some of those guests were not just friends. They were lawyers, business owners, board members, people trained to recognize risk, and they recognized it immediately. Natalie's fiancé family was among the first to intervene, not emotionally, procedurally. They requested documentation. They asked questions. They did not accuse. They verified. Within days, the engagement was quietly put on hold, then canceled. No announcement, no explanation, just silence. Because old money does not argue publicly. It withdraws. At the same time, something else began moving. The forensic accountant had warned me that once documentation existed, it would not stay contained. He was right. A formal complaint was filed with the state board overseeing licensed accountants. Not by me, by someone who had seen the live stream and understood the implications. When a licensed professional is named in a public statement involving unreported income, boards are required to review. They do not need motive. They need jurisdiction. Natalie's license was now under examination. Every return she had prepared, every classification, every signature. That process does not move quickly, but it moves relentlessly. Then came the audit that did not come from the board. It came from a different direction. The same neighbor who had mentioned the paid-off mortgage had done more than talk. She had filed a whistleblower report, quietly, formally. She included public records, dates, addresses. She did not accuse. She submitted facts. The IRS responded the way it always does, with letters, requests, deadlines. An audit does not announce itself loudly. It arrives in envelopes. My parents received those envelopes within weeks. I did not hear about it from them. I heard about it from someone else. A family friend who called to ask if everything was all right. The question itself was telling. News was spreading without being spoken. At home, the atmosphere shifted completely. My parents stopped hosting, stopped attending events, stopped answering calls. The house that had always been open and orderly went quiet, controlled, locked down. They were not preparing a defense for me. They were preparing one for themselves. Natalie stopped contacting me altogether. No messages, no explanations. Silence can be a strategy too. Professionally, she withdrew. Engagement announcements disappeared. Online profiles went private. This was not remorse. It was containment. The narrative they had relied on for years was collapsing under the weight of verification. Not opinion, verification. People began asking questions my parents could not answer. Why was there no rental income reported? Why was the mortgage paid off years earlier? Why did the timeline not match the story? Why had no one noticed before? The answer to that last question was simple. Because no one had looked. And once someone did, the system failed. I stayed out of it. I did not post. I did not comment. I did not respond to speculation. Because the truth does not need reinforcement once it is documented. The consequences were not dramatic. They were administrative. and administrative consequences are the ones that last. Audits take time, reviews take time, but they do not forget. By the end of the month, the engagement was officially canceled. No public statement, no explanation, just absence. That absence spoke louder than any apology could have. My parents' reputation did not shatter in one moment. It eroded, slowly. Trust does not disappear overnight. It fades. Invitations stopped coming. Calls went unanswered. People created distance without confrontation, and that distance became permanent. As for me, I returned to my routine: work, gym, grocery shopping, life. Some coworkers had seen the video. They did not bring it up. They did not need to. Respect looks like that sometimes. I did not feel triumph. I felt closure. Because the truth had done what truth does, it revealed. And then it stepped back. I did not chase consequences. I did not demand outcomes. I let the system respond to itself. And it did. Because systems built on misrepresentation eventually encounter verification. And verification does not negotiate. In the next and final part, I will tell you what this taught me, what walking away without shouting gave me, and why reclaiming your story is sometimes the most powerful ending you can choose. Because not every victory looks loud, some look quiet and permanent. After everything settled, people expected more from me. Another statement, another explanation, another reaction. They expected anger, they expected confrontation, they expected a final argument that would make the ending feel complete. But I did none of that. I left quietly. Not because I was afraid, because I was finished. Walking away without arguing was not weakness. It was clarity. I had already said everything that mattered. I had already shown the facts. There was nothing left to debate. I did not seek revenge. I did not demand punishment. I did not celebrate anyone's downfall. I asked for one thing only, the truth. And once the truth was visible, it no longer belonged to me. It belonged to reality. For years, I had been trained to believe that loyalty meant silence, that gratitude meant compliance, that family meant obligation. What I learned through this process was different. Family is not the people who take from you and call it responsibility. Family is not the people who benefit from your silence. Family is not the people who require you to shrink so they can look larger. Family is the people who do not need you to disappear in order to succeed. When I walked away from that night, I did not lose a family. I gained my autonomy, and that changed everything. In the months that followed, my life became quieter, not emptier, clearer. I moved out. I got my own place. Not extravagant, not symbolic, just mine. I went to work every day without carrying the weight of a secret that was never mine to keep. And something unexpected happened. My career began to move forward, not because of what happened, but because I was no longer distracted by what I was carrying. When you stop managing other people's lies, you free up an incredible amount of energy. I took on new responsibilities. I spoke with more confidence. I stopped doubting myself in rooms where I belonged. People noticed, not the story, the steadiness. I did not become louder. I became grounded. And that was enough. I never heard an apology from my parents, and I did not wait for one. Apologies that come after exposure are not always about accountability. Sometimes they are about damage control. I chose peace over closure. I chose distance over reconciliation. And that was the right choice for me. If you are watching this and you feel conflicted, I want you to hear something clearly. You are allowed to tell the truth, even if it disrupts comfort. You are allowed to ask questions, even if it makes people defensive. You are allowed to walk away, even if others call it selfish. Silence does not make you mature. Silence makes harm easier to maintain. Truth does not need perfect timing. It needs courage. And courage does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like gathering documents quietly. Sometimes it looks like waiting. Sometimes it looks like walking out of a room without raising your voice. The most important lesson I learned is this: you do not owe anyone your silence, and you not owe anyone access to you after they have proven they cannot be trusted. If parts of this story resonated with you, if you have ever been made to feel responsible for someone else's wrongdoing, you are not alone. And you are not wrong for wanting clarity. Before this video ends, I want to ask you to do a few things. If this story helped you see your own situation more clearly, please like this video. It helps this message reach people who might need it. If you have experienced something similar, Or if this story made you reflect on your own boundaries, leave a comment below. Your words might help someone else feel less isolated. And if you want to hear more stories about truth, accountability, and reclaiming control, make sure you subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming. Different people, different situations. Same lesson. Silence protects the wrong people. Truth sets the right ones free. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening. And remember this: you are allowed to choose yourself.